Hold on, we're live.
Okay, hi there everyone. We're just waiting for a few more people to join in. You're very welcome today to our webinar on the role of digital technologies in respiratory health. Yeah, we'll just give it a minute here to make sure our technology is working correctly. Digital technologies. I'm getting a bit of feedback of myself talking. So, yeah. Okay. Okay, people here joining us now, thank you for joining us this lunchtime. We'll get going in just about 60 seconds or so, just to give time for people to join the call.
Yeah, it's probably worth saying it is important for people to click on the YouTube link and then they can start viewing the stream. Well, people aren't used to the platform.
Okay, I think we'll make a start. I have a few minutes of introduction anyway before we get into the good stuff. You're very welcome to this webinar. My name is David Brana, and along with our colleagues in HSC, the R&D division, we at CHIC have put together a series of webinars bringing together our clinical practitioners, local industry, and university researchers. These sessions aim to ensure that we have greater engagement between industry, academia, and Northern Ireland's clinical and health expertise in efforts to promote and increase greater levels of digital health innovation and collaboration in the region. Indeed, the HSC Industry Engagement Unit has been recently established to act as a front door for inquiries for industry seeking to collaborate with health and/or commission clinical evaluations and studies. The format today is online, and we're aiming for about an hour. When COVID restrictions relax, we will explore which formats work best, and welcome your feedback on this. I would encourage all our speakers to keep the time, and we'll let you know if we need to move on. Today, as I say, we're looking at the role of digital technologies in respiratory health. Chronic respiratory diseases are diseases of the airways and other structures of the lung, and are among the leading causes of morbidity and mortality worldwide. Some of the most common chronic respiratory diseases are asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, and occupational lung diseases. And these disease entities are important contributions to the rising burden of non-communicable diseases globally. A recent study in The Lancet found that chronic respiratory diseases were the third leading cause of death in 2017. And in some research done by the British Lung Foundation, they find that of the general UK population, approximately 12.7 million people have a history of asthma, COPD, or other long-standing respiratory illness. Half of these, that's about 6.5 million people, report taking prescribed medication for lung disease in the last year. We have an exciting lineup of clinicians and industry with us today, and over the next hour, you'll see a number of presentations. If you have any questions as we go through the presentation, please feel free to enter those into the YouTube chat feature. And we hope to pick up a short panel session at the end, if time permits. First up, we're going to go to Dr. Martin Kelly. Martin is a respiratory consultant at Altnagelvin Area Hospital. And Martin was on the front line of managing respiratory complications arising from COVID-19, including an impassioned plea to public in September 2020. Martin's been involved in a number of research studies, including looking at the links between sedentary behaviour and bronchiectasis, I hope we got that right, and looking at quality.
Bronchiectasis, yeah.
There we go, and inflammation of exacerbations. Martin's also a clinical lead at the smart inhaler company, Aflo. I'll pass it over to Martin. Thanks.
Okay, David, thanks very much for the introduction, and I have to say that this is a novel thing for me to do as a very much a clinician on the ground. So it's nice maybe to be doing it, and I'm thank Barry for asking me to do it. My day-to-day is very much, as you've outlined, it is very much on the ground, and we've worked a lot with COVID, but I'm actually not talking too much here about COVID. You'll be glad to hear, though, again, and I know some of the other speakers will allude to it, very important, very important disease process, and all the effects of it has revolutionized actually how we work. So although I won't talk specifically about it as a disease entity, it has an impact on everything, I think, and on our thinking and how we do things. So Patrick, could you maybe go to the first slide first, please? And that's just, I suppose, to again acknowledge, the first slide or two tells you a bit about who I am. I'm a consultant here in Altnagalvin since 2004. We work fairly closely, actually, and increasingly closely, and hope to continue to do this with UU. Very happy that they've got a graduate entry medical school now in the Northwest. So again, to just acknowledge that, and we work with CHIC as a research facility here, and I'm sure most of you are aware of it, on site in Altnagalvin. So I work through that. So maybe go to the next slide, please, Patrick. Thank you. This is just talking about what I do. As I say, my day-to-day work involves a number of areas. I work in outpatients, which was where I am now, and about once I finish here, I'll start a clinic. I have a lot of role in inpatient care. I also am involved in diagnostics and endoscopy, which is I will allude to that briefly. And as people said, I'm very interested in research and try to, as much as possible, keep involved. And again, we've learned so much about research through COVID. I've been lucky to be involved in the recovery trial, which has been a massive success and continues to produce great research. So if we go to the next slide, then please, Patrick. Patrick's my glamorous assistant. Thank you, Patrick. So yeah, before COVID came along, yes, we were beginning to use digital technology. Now, respiratory is a very traditional specialty, and a lot of it still does involve on the ground, seeing patients face to face, doing very traditional things, doing very simple things. But we were beginning to explore the role of digital technologies, and there'll be some probably on the call who are aware of, I would say, ultimately ill-fated attempt to introduce sort of a bit more of a digital approach to our patients, probably more than 10 years ago now, maybe longer, the concept of telehealth, telemonitoring. I know that still exists as a concept. There was a process whereby lots of equipment was bought and put into patients' houses, and there was a network set up whereby alerts could be generated, etc. The problem with it was that it probably didn't involve a lot of pre-planning with clinicians and people on the ground, and it just didn't work for a variety of reasons. You could talk about this for long enough, and there's lots of evidence and research actually around telehealth, telemonitoring, and does it or doesn't it work. And actually it isn't the be all and end all either, but that was the beginnings. That was one of the first times maybe we thought a little bit about remotely engaging with patients and monitoring patients. A slightly different approach, but it's still very much a digital approach, and this is, I think, something Northern Ireland should be very proud of, is what's called the electronic care record. So we have an integrated system where if I'm in a hospital in Altnagalvin here, or if I'm in Belfast or in somewhere else, I can go into a system where I can get access to clinic letters, blood results, pathology, radiology, lots of stuff like that in the one site. It's almost a portal, and I know that's that actually is quite the envy of other places as well. We've had clinicians come to work with us from other parts of the UK, and they've said, look, we just don't have this. So I think that connectedness, that ability to access information rapidly, I think is a digital innovation, and that is an evolving thing. And we know that in a short number of years, we will be moving on to what's called Encompass, and I do mention it later on briefly as well. In more recent years, and you can see a couple of images there showing people who are using what we call CPAP. And you mentioned at the start, David, about respiratory health is really high on the list of common problems throughout the world. Absolutely right. One of the biggest challenging conditions is obstructive sleep apnea, because there's a lot of it, and you can really revolutionize people's lives by treating it. So even in recent years, there's been a lot of innovation by the companies who build these machines, these CPAP machines. And what we've been able to do in recent years, and I think this illustrates, I think, where we would want to be going, is we can now monitor patients remotely who are using the machines. And what we can tell is whether they're using it or not, how many hours they're using it for, and you can actually begin to troubleshoot as well. If they're having problems with their machine, they don't need to come to the hospital. The company has it's set up using Wi-Fi links, and it used to be, before the Wi-Fi links came on, we used to get data cards that would be sent back and forth, which was still an innovation. But now it's all done over Wi-Fi, and our specialists here in the hospital can download data and see how the patient is doing, and then perhaps follow it up with a telephone call. If we go to the next slide, Patrick. Yep, and then along came COVID, and that's me as one of the early parts of COVID. And again, as you know, and again, it is important to acknowledge COVID. The top right picture is showing that at one point Northern Ireland, and particularly the Northwest, had probably the highest incidence of COVID in the UK, and something that we were notorious for, and briefly had our 15 seconds of fame in the media. So COVID came along; it has challenged us a lot. Next slide, please, Patrick. Thank you. So what happened? Well, first thing is we weren't able to see patients face to face anymore, for lots of reasons. So we had the dilemma: how do we stay in touch with our patients? And again, I'm putting out here challenges. I'm not really coming up with solutions, because what we've ended up doing, and I think it's a bit unsatisfactory, is we've ended up telephoning everybody. Now that's okay, and it's better than not contacting our patients, but a very old technology, isn't it, for to be in the 21st century, to be relying on to make contact with patients. What we'd love to be able to do is use platforms like this, for example, to make more contact with patients. I know there's a lot of work being done developing this, but I think one of the challenges is to get these things accepted widely as well. And I think what I find is that a lot of our patients with chronic lung disease, if you look at the epidemiology of chronic lung disease, it is a disease of poverty to some extent, and deprivation. So people may not be very. I've heard this phrase of digital poverty. I'm sure people who know more about technology than me are well aware of this concept. So that some of our folks are not that savvy with technology. They may not have easy access to the internet and to Wi-Fi, so we're falling back and relying on the phone, which is fine. But I think I'd love to see some more sophistication in how we interact with our patients. And there are developments, and there's always, the NHS is very slow to change, as everybody knows, and I think that can be quite frustrating. But I mean, you might say, why not just use things like Zoom or other platforms that exist? But there's always concerns about confidentiality, perhaps excessive concerns maybe at times, but it's something we have to be very cognizant of. Next slide, Patrick, please. This might be the one that's got unpleasant pictures, is it? No, next one's the unpleasant pictures. Okay, this is a little bit of some of the things that are starting to happen. So patients can, it's very simple, and people are aware of the concept of an oxygen saturation monitor has really taken off in the last year and a half. COVID has, everybody all of a sudden has an oxygen saturation monitor, very simple technology. People can use these at home, and I'm sure there are some that can sort of be remotely downloaded, but even, it's a very simple technology that patients can monitor themselves. We're beginning to see the role of doing lung function remotely. So can you train patients to use a simple, what we call spirometer, to measure their lung physiology. And a lot of this is about measuring physiology. And yes, you can. And indeed, we're beginning to start a study very soon that's looking at idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, another important respiratory condition. Part of that study is going to be done almost, it's called the TPAL study, I've just mentioned it there. That's going to be almost, and it's a multi-center UK-wide study looking at doing almost everything remotely. So that, doing research remotely, that's kind of novel, I think, and I think it's great that we're starting to do that. And they're going to train the patients to use the simple spirometer, and they'll use a lot of technology as regards keeping in touch with patients, and I think it's going to work well, and I'm very much welcome that. So we're beginning, we're starting to see these kind of things being done, and I think we need to see a lot more of this happening going forward. Next slide, Patrick. Might be the one with the. No, actually, no. The horrible pictures come later. This is a little bit. This is an area that I think is interesting, and I think someone alluded to. I'm involved a little bit myself with a project. Began to look at this, but inhaler technology is an inhaler monitoring technology, perhaps is a better way of putting it, because inhalers have existed for many years, but we are, and they've evolved, but the big challenge is that people, as you all know, are not always adherent with their treatments, and patients may forget, or they may have trouble using them. So a lot of these devices evolved, they're both software and hardware. As you can see, the very top propeller platform is a very simple device that clicks on the top of your inhaler, and then it downloads to a smartphone, and you can measure very many different parameters. The bottom left, the purple, it was called an Inca device that's been around a number of years, actually well before COVID. It was developed. I was involving some folks in Dublin and in Belfast that were involved in developing this, and it's really more of a research tool. But what it's doing is monitoring people using their inhalers, and as they click the inhalers. One on the middle is another device that does something similar, and the one on the right is just a very simple device that clicks on the top of your inhaler. Now, some of them are not the most elegant in the world, as you can see, and I think this is a rapidly evolving area, but I think it's an important area. Patrick, next slide, please. The next slide is probably something very similar. Again, it's just really just, I won't say name dropping, but just alluding to that there are a couple of big names. That, for example, the top one here is an Adherian. These are American companies primarily, I think. Anyway, Adherian have a device that attaches to an inhaler, Symbicort inhaler, and then links up by Bluetooth with software on a smartphone. And indeed, I think Capmedic do something similar. So again, I'm just saying this is an area that's really fruitful, I think, and it's interesting, and it can help improve patient compliance. It means that patients don't have to come to see us in the hospital, and they're kept away from infections. Next slide, please, Patrick. Yeah, this is the one with the horrible pictures. Sorry for that at lunchtime. But this is just, I do a lot of endoscopy. So I do bronchoscopies. I look down into people's lungs. I see lung cancers. The top two pictures show you two separate types of lung cancers. The one on the bottom is an image taken in theatre of part of the top right lesion having been resected. But why have I put this up? I just want everything to be more joined up. I want us to be able to join up images, clinical images with radiological images, and Encompass and ECR are beginning this, but we want to make things more integratable, if there's such a word. Okay, next slide, please, Patrick. I'm aware of my time. I'm ticking on, so I'll try and finish up. So yeah, going forward, image integration, that's kind of that last, like, can we get everything sort of linked up together, and as I say, Encompass will bring it. The other area, and again, I noticed one of the other speakers I think are involved in use of looking at radiology systems, and there's a lot of interest now in artificial intelligence and how it can assist clinicians to make clinical decisions in lots of areas, particularly radiology. And then, as I say, remote patient monitoring, I think, is definitely a way to go. So that's just a few areas that, to me personally, on the ground, are of interest, and I feel are worth exploring. So I'm happy to take questions, or if I've run over, we can move on to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think we'll at this point we'll keep going, and hopefully come back to the questions in a moment. It's great to hear some of the latest technology being adopted into respiratory management. Next up, we have Dr. Murali Shyam-Sundar, who's a senior clinical lecturer and consultant in intensive care at the RVH, Royal Victoria Hospital and Queen's University Belfast. So Murali also splits his time between research and practice. On the research side of things, really focusing on discovery science and critical care big data, publications including applying AI to manage acute chronic conditions and studying the efficacy of high-flow nasal cannula therapy in conditions such as acute respiratory failure. Murali, you're very welcome, and I'll pass it over to you to give us some of your thoughts with a focus on the critical care sector.
Thanks, David, for the kind introduction. And once again, thanks a lot for the opportunity to present what I'm doing. But I'll just focus on just how we are using big data in critical care. It's not a generic overview of everything which is going on, but what we have managed to set up within ICU and what direction which we think we will be taking and what generic researchers in this field should be doing before applying the tools they develop into actual clinical care. Just going to share my screen. For some reason, my PowerPoint, which I have on my screen, is not coming up.
That's right, Murali. I have your presentation here, so I can also go through your slides if you just tell me when to click through to the next one.
Sorry about that.
Just let me load up your presentation.
Yeah. Apologies. Not sure why it's not showing up on my share window. Thanks, Patrick. So does it go into a slideshow mode at all, or that's not possible?
That's not possible because then I can't see the screen and what you're doing.
Of course. Okay. Apologies. So for this part of the talk, while the title is Respiratory Health, I work in critical care, and we did involve ourselves with the COVID response, etc. And some of the topic, especially the first case scenario, which I'll be discussing, will be relevant to all patients with acute respiratory distress syndrome, which will include COVID patients at the same time. There are a few unique characteristics of both the data and the population for in digital health and critical care. From a data point of view, we get a whole lot of data from different areas, which could be physiological data from devices, laboratory data for blood tests, etc. We also get the text field data coming through and also images. So it's a complex data field, and we do need to ensure we have adequate data validation techniques, filtering techniques, etc., especially for physiological streams, to ensure that data veracity is improved in this field. But that is from the data end. But what's also important is the population, i.e. the staff or the patients who will interact with any tools which we deploy. And ICUs are areas with very high workload and already suffer from a high alert fatigue situation. So if you're introducing any technology driven through data, for example, a smart alert system or a clinical decision support system, we need to ensure that this is developed with adequate interaction and iterative process with the staff themselves to ensure we maximize and optimize the benefit the patients will come from introduction of these technologies, rather than actually ending up adding more workload to the staff. So from that basis, I'll go to the next slide. Patrick, next slide. Yeah. So this is called the knowledge to action framework. This was actually proposed first in about 2000s by Graham et al. And they look at two components. One is the development or the evidence generation, which is an inner funnel, which looks at inquiry, synthesis, and the development of the tools or the products, followed by what they call the action cycle or the implementation, where while you're implementing, you should also understand the local context, understand the barriers and facilitators. You might need to modify your tool for the specific unit or the circumstance or the place where you're implementing it. And you should also evaluate the response and sustain any response. So this is a 7-step action cycle they propose they use. And in one of my test cases, I'll show how we are using this knowledge to action framework to implement a CDSS, clinical decision support tool, to improve practice in critical care. Next slide, please. Why do we need a CDSS or a smart alert system? And that is because quite frequently, while we know that certain things have evidence, they do not translate to practice. For example, on the left side of the slide, you will see a table which talks about what we call lung protective ventilation or lower tidal volume ventilation. Why tidal volume stands for the amount of breath or the amount of air you put into a lung per breath. And we know that if it is less than 8 mL or even lower, it is associated with better outcomes. For example, in the first line, you can see that the lower tidal volume group have a significantly better outcome with reduced mortality when compared to traditional tidal volume group. And this is a very simple thing to implement. And this paper came out in 2000. But unfortunately, if you focus on the graph on the right-hand side of that slide, which came out in 2016, which was an international survey of lung protective ventilation strategies implemented in practice. And if you look at the lower right part of the graph, which is greater than 8 mL per kilogram body weight, you can see almost a quarter of these patients with ARDS are still ventilated with injurious lung ventilation. This shows you that despite 16 years of known evidence, it doesn't translate well into practice. So this is one of the reasons why we do need to implement decision support tools within critical care using leveraging the routinely collected data to improve patient outcomes. Next slide, please. So with that idea in mind, we introduced a system or developed a system called VILI Alert, which stands for Ventilator-Induced Lung Injury Alert, which looked at a retrospective database of tidal volumes collected and looked at generating automated alerts with a very high true positivity rate. In that, one of the first challenges which we met, if you focus on the left-hand side of the slide, which is a blue and red graph, the blue graph is the actual tidal volume measured, and you can see the noise within it with a lot of outliers, which is not just physiological variability, but it could be due to patients being turned, sensors being erroneous, or even disconnections from ventilator, or a deep breath taken by the patient themselves, and these need smoothened out before you can introduce or start analyzing the data. And that's what we did by averaging 15-minute, 1-minute time bins over a 15-minute period to smoothen out the outliers. And there you can see in the red superimposed graph, this works really well in taking out the outliers and the random fluctuations. What we did next is to see whether we can predict using AI methodology, using regression methods to see whether we can predict which patient is going to breach the protective lung ventilation thresholds. And here on the right-hand side in the graph, you can see the blue color, which is a true tidal volume, and the green color, which is predicted by our model. And you can see it matches and correlates really well, even 1 hour in advance. In other words, if somebody is going to breach their tidal volume thresholds, we could be alerted 1 hour ahead of that. And this is very useful because it might give us the opportunity to intervene a bit early and stop such an event from happening. And if you go to the next slide, we also looked at, we also have the actual tidal volume 1 hour ahead. So we looked at the true positive rate and also the false negative rate, where TP stands for true positive and FN stands for false negative. And this table, we have presented the data for 22 patients, and we looked at 2 different techniques, which is AdaBoost as well as the RNN technique. And here you can see that the true positive rate for most of the patients is very high. And in other words, the chance of alert fatigue is going to be a lot lower, ensuring that the patients have adequate time to be intervened with and prevent injurious lung ventilation. So here you can see how routinely collected data, which is actually wasted and not looked at, can be used to develop a intuitive, smart, predictive tool which could prevent injurious lung ventilation and improve patients' outcome by improving their survival. Next slide, please. So in that study, we actually tried to implement a text-based service to the alert service to the clinicians, and it did not work because clinicians couldn't respond to the alert in sufficient time due to various workload pressures. And we went back to the drawing board, and we decided to look at the barriers and facilitators, but also we tried to see how we can develop a model for a smart alert system which actually gives precision and personalized predictions. So if you see in the blue, first light blue box on the left-hand side, that is the hospital's real-time patient monitoring system. From that, what we have done in the last couple of years is introduced an anonymized or a pseudo-anonymized electronic health record, which sits within the trust itself, where we collect the data. And the ventilator data, of which the tidal volume we used, is used in two different ways. First is to develop a generic prediction model for the unit itself based on retrospective data. But going forward, as patient-specific data comes through, we can use personalized predictions by using patient-specific data and provide alerts for these patients. And this is something which we are aspiring to do by using routinely collected data within critical care. And there are a couple of projects and grants we have applied for in this area. Next slide, please. Now, in the Willy Alert system, I did talk about how we tried to introduce a text-based service to the clinicians and improve ventilation practice, but we realized that the response time is quite poor, or response rate is also quite poor. We went back to the knowledge to action framework and then decided to understand what are the barriers and facilitators for the implementation of a CDSS. And this led to what is called the attitude trial, where a key focus is actually not just the implementation aspect, but also a large body of work of qualitative study, where we will be looking at non-participant observation and focus groups to understand what are the barriers and facilitators for implementation of such a tool within critical care, and also develop the CDSS iteratively with feedbacks from the user, from which we think that it will improve or maximize the chance of showing potential benefit of such a system in critical care. And this will be tested out in 2022 in a feasibility study. Even though we call it a feasibility study, it will be a quality improvement project by using the CDSS to improve our ventilation practices in ICU. And hopefully we'll have the results of that by end of 2022. Next slide, please. The other key way how we can leverage routinely collected data is to improve how we manage our data and how we can use it to benchmark practice. Currently, there are about 99% of the data within ICU is actually sitting dormant or is actually dumped at the end of 24 hours. And one of the reasons why this is done is because we don't have access to this information quite easily sitting at the clinical front. So we have developed the information management system, where we have also created a dashboard which will project key parameters, for example, arterial line days, central line days, and in going forward, this can be developed into an intuitive smart alert system where it can include other physiological variables such as temperature, white cells, etc., to even suggest whether we should be replacing a central line or suggesting line sepsis, etc. Through this, we can benchmark our practice against set standards. For example, the duration for which a central line or peripheral line needs to stay within a patient. And through this, we could reduce bloodstream infection rates, reduce antibiotic use, and in turn, reduce antibiotic resistance, development of antibiotic resistance. And this is, once again, an aspirational tool at the minute, but we are hoping to integrate this into a live system in the next year or so. Next slide, please, Patrick. Now, this is what is called the ICU Analytics dashboard. This is a front end to all the data where if a user can log in and access a specific group of patients to get benchmark their practice once again against expected guidance and protocols. For example, you could get patients with ARDS, for example, acute respiratory distress syndrome, and see how soon are these patients being weaned off ventilation, and see whether weaning protocols have been implemented properly. Through this, what we are also hoping to do is generate automated reports, and this will significantly reduce staff workload. And also by improving and increasing the frequency of the reports, we could actually use them as subtle nudge technologies to improve practice within ICU and not just to benchmark our practice against set standards. Now, coming to the last slide, actually, what we do need to do is currently there is something called a MIMIC database based in Massachusetts, MIT, where they've linked hospital data to actually even post-discharge data. And that's something which we do need to focus on because we do need to see what their outcomes are post-ICU discharge. And this is something which we'll put in motion in the next 2 or 3 years. And the last slide now is our next steps, which is to deploy these smart CDSS as part of the EQIP in the Attitude trial. We'll be integrating the ICU Analytics dashboard with the live data and generate our automated reports. And finally, what I think important is to break the silos of databases and data warehouses and integrate our ICU electronic health record with a regional system such as NIECR, which Martin previously alluded to. And with that, I'll come to a conclusion of what I wanted to tell you, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Moralia. It's very nice to see a specific data application in the healthcare setting. I mean, we know that the great impact that big data and the analysis of that is going to have going forward, but it's nice to see a concrete example. We'll move on to our industry speakers now, just for the essence of time. And our first industry speaker is Roger Walsh from Inico. Roger has a background in software and has been with Inico for 16 years. Inico operate in the areas of cloud computing, data optimization, and analytics, often within the healthcare application, but also within government, media, finance, and telecoms. You may have noticed Inico in the news earlier this year where they announced 1.5 million investment and 15 new jobs. And Roger's going to talk to us about a software system that Inico have been working on, looking at respiratory health and management in its broadest sense. Roger.
Thanks, David. Yes, as David pointed out, I'm a software engineer and a data analyst. So I'm still reeling from that slide in the first presentation. A bit squeamish, I have to say. So let me see if I can share my screen and let me see. Can you see that? So as Dave mentioned, Inico is a Belfast-based software company. We've been in operation for about 15 years, and we specialize in data. Cloud data management and migration and data analysis. And we work for very large scale projects and companies such as IBM. We help them with their cloud infrastructure, but we also work on challenging analytics projects. For example, we currently are engaged with NI Water on a wide range of problems covering things like pumping efficiency, leakage detection, and geospatial population. But of course, today I want to show you a little bit about a few highlights anyway from our recently completed project, Clean Air for Healthcare. I'll just briefly explain what it is, and I'll have time for a couple of examples of the kind of things that you can do with it. So as part of a collaboration with HSCNI and the Belfast City Council, we took part in a project to study the impact of pollution on long-term health problems. programs. And that included looking at ways of supporting care and self-management for chronic respiratory problems. Now, the numbers on the screen have already been laid out at the start of this webinar, so I just really want to highlight one of them, and that is the 10,000 critical care admissions every year, and about 50% of them are readmissions after about 6 months. So this is a kind of a personal thing. I would say that if you were to embark on any initiative to try and improve respiratory care, that would be the metric. That would be the metric I would like to target, to see that trend down, because at the minute it's trending up, and especially in children. So clean air for healthcare was a key output of that collaboration with the HSC and I. And it's a data hub that where we brought together data from 11 different organizations to build a healthcare research hub and a platform for application development. Now, there's a list of kind of topics that it covers on screen, and that's really just a subset of what it has available. There are literally hundreds of millions of data points covering dozens of different aspects of life in Northern Ireland. And they're all linked, and they are especially linked geospatially. So the core driver of this consolidated data set was to take that geospatial look and to layer in pollution and localized pollution and how it can impact people. So we have integrated an extensive historical record of data going back 10 years, but we also have real-time pollution feeds and from IoT sensors. So we have linked into DERA's data sets, and we connected into third-party pollution sensor networks, but we also deployed our own sensors. Now, the reason that we did this is partly because of the coverage in Belfast is quite poor for these kind of things. So we wanted to get that nice, if you look at the map on the left, that nice west to east and north-south corridor of collection. But actually the key reason for developing our own sensors and putting them out there was that we wanted to target pollution in the home. Now, this is something that's fairly underserved, I think, at the minute. And you can see an example on the right, where the red line is the internal pollution of a suburban home, and the background is what's happening outside. And one thing just to pick out of it is that you can see spikes. There are spikes in the pollution that could be considered worrying approximately every 10 days. And these can be reflected inside. At some of the levels of internal pollution that we measured over the period of the project could be considered worrying. And it's just something that really should be looked into, and I think there's definitely more scope for work at internal pollution studies. Now, what you're seeing here is an example of a geospatial exploration tool that we've built on top. So this is an application that is driven off our data hub, and it allows you to explore, and it allows you to collate and collect data and look at the relationships between health, deprivation, and pollution, and all of the other aspects of the data set that we have available. The screenshot that I've selected here is really an example of that divide that you see in many cities, with the amber and the red representing more deprived areas. In fact, some of the most deprived areas in Northern Ireland are in West Belfast. And then the green reflects a more affluent group of people. So this is just a tool that you can use that allows you to select the data sets and explore that data sets and pick apart that relationship. So which brings me to the kind of the conclusion of why that would be useful and what you can do with it. And that holistic view and that consolidated view can sometimes be necessary. So on the left, you can see a strange graph. And I'm not a clinician, so I might pronounce these incorrectly, but it's a plot of salbutamol, which is a respiratory reliever, versus metformin, which is a drug used in the treatment of diabetes. Why would there be such a striking relationship between the two? Now, if you use our data sets and our tools to tease that apart, and you extract out areas that are deprived, you find that there is no relationship between salbutamol and metformin. It's not actually there. What you're seeing on the left needs to be very carefully understood, and it is a reflection of comorbidity in deprived areas. in West and North Belfast, unfortunately, you're much more likely to suffer from a respiratory illness and from diabetes, which is what we're looking at. On the right is another example where you can tease that relationship apart. And we have, in the red line is the most deprived areas of Belfast, the salbutamol dosage over time. Now, there's a very curious thing happening around Christmas, which we'll ignore when I can't explain. But the key point to take away is the difference between that red line and the green line is 15 times more salbutamol is used in deprived areas of Belfast. So our analysis extends way beyond this, and I have many more slides that I could show. But there's always this kind of disparity. There's always this kind of link. There's always this need to really understand the populations that you're studying and get the best data that you have geospatially. So you can't really discuss healthcare, for example, in any way without really taking into the context of the people that you're studying. So that was really a very quick sample of what we did with Clean Air for Healthcare and how we used it. And I think it's important to point out that most of the data that we have available in that data set is not restricted. And so it can be shared, and we are keen to share it. So if there's anybody who has interest in it, please do get in touch.
Thank you very much, Roger. It's very nice to see those visualizations of the data, you know, and really, as you say, even some of the visualizations aren't what they first appear to be. You know, there's a bit more work to draw out sort of the power behind those. Thank you very much. Should I just say, just at this, as we're moving between, if you continue to put any questions you have into the chat in YouTube, we'll hopefully be able to address some of those at the end. And if not, we hope we will follow those up after the session today. Next up, we have David Ribeiro. David is CEO of Proaxis and has a long background in pharma. Proaxis are a local company developing a range of products for the capture, detection, and measurement of active protease biomarkers of disease. And recently announced, I'm not sure if you're going to refer to this, David, recently announced a significant collaboration with AstraZeneca. Proaxis have been involved in a number of CHIC projects looking at electronic readers and data analytics, but I'll pass it over to David. He's going to give us a bit of a rundown on what they're currently doing and what the future holds.
Yeah, thanks, David. That's great. And hopefully you can hear me okay with the technology. So I think that that David actually summarized this very nicely there as a starting point. So I think maybe we should employ him at Proaxis. But Proaxis, as David said, is a protease diagnostics company. We originally spun out from Queen's in 2013, and we prepare two types of assays. So one is an activity-based immunoassay, so a laboratory-based assay running on 96 well plates. The other is a point-of-care test format in a lateral flow design. We have a number of assays which are already commercially available for things like neutrophil elastase and proteinase 3 as biomarkers of lung infection and inflammation. And we also have a point-of-care test neat stick for close patient monitoring of neutrophil elastase. And as David alluded to, we have a number of assays in development, some of which we developed internally ourselves, such as cathepsin G, so another respiratory protease biomarker, but also products that we've in-licensed from other companies, including most recently a COVID-19 antibody test from AstraZeneca. The other thing that we do here in Catalyst is that we measure a number of cytokines, so interleukins, things like that. And I'll revert back to that in one of the later slides. But there are a large number of biomarkers associated with inflammation and respiratory disease that would be of interest to researchers and clinicians. So I mentioned NeatStick, our point-of-care test. As you can see on the top right, this is a relatively simplistic lateral flow device. Many of us would have seen those before for other indications, but this was the first ever sputum-based lateral flow device. It was a challenge to design. We went through 4 different design companies before we got to this point and ended up working with somebody in the US. But the idea of NeatStick is, whilst the lab-based assays give us a result within 2 to 3 hours, but require a laboratory and significant experience, that the NeatStick can give us an indicative result within 10 minutes. And in fact, you start to see the outcome within a couple of seconds. So that means that it gives the opportunity for clinicians and researchers to get an idea of a patient's neutrophil elastase level very rapidly whilst they're in the clinic with them. And what this means, and what we're trying to do with NeatStick, is to identify which patients are at highest risk of suffering a clinical exacerbation. So as many of you will know, patients with chronic diseases such as COPD, cystic fibrosis, bronchiectasis have a decline in lung function, a chronic decline over a long period of time, but experience exacerbations where they get sudden drops in lung function and struggle to recover from those. And these are usually driven by some sort of outside influence, such as a bacterial infection. What we see with NeatStick, where we're measuring active elastase, is if the NeatStick result is high, then those patients have a much shorter time to their next exacerbation and a much higher number of exacerbations over the following year. So this is a nice monitoring tool for clinicians in particular to identify which cohort of their patients are at most risk and therefore need most care going forward over the following months. So this data was presented in 2019 as part of a paper in the European Respiratory Journal, and it got a lot of publicity at the time, but the NeatStick does have some limitations with where we'd like it to be in the future. So as I think the first speaker, Martin, alluded to, one of the issues currently is that we're trying to minimize the amount of face-to-face contact that patients have with their clinician. So in an ideal world, you'd like the NeatStick to be able to be done at home by the patient themselves, rather than having to go into hospital or into the GP and having it done by a trained healthcare professional. Also at the moment, NeatStick only gives you a qualitative result. So there's a pre-built-in danger threshold, which has been set, and you get a yes/no answer as to whether the patient's elastase is above that danger threshold. And finally, of course, I mentioned there are a large number of inflammatory biomarkers that we'd be interested in. NeatStick only gives us information about one of those, which is neutrophil elastase. So thinking about how digital health might be able to support with this, there are a number of different options that we've already started looking at, and I'm sure there's many more that would be of interest. So first of all, if we can incorporate some kind of reader device, that would enable us to create real-time remote monitoring of patients. So if you imagine a system where there's a quantitative figure that can be directed to the patient's healthcare professional by something like Bluetooth, so the patient can do the test at home themselves, but the healthcare professional can still monitor any changes in their neutrophil elastase level, then that would be a step forward versus the existing format that we have. But really excitingly, what we're exploring at the moment is, can you take a wide range of inflammatory biomarkers and use AI and machine learning and smart analytics to assess complex data sets to give you a more comprehensive overview of the inflammatory status of the patient. So if you had a system where you take a sample and you measure 7 or 8 different inflammatory biomarkers, so neutrophil elastase, proteinase 3, a number of cytokines, and you had an algorithm in place that took care of the cross correlations between those different parameters and gave you an overall risk factor rather than just basing it on one single parameter, then that would give clinicians and researchers an enormous wealth of information that they could use to direct treatment processes going forward with individual patients. So really driving individual precision medicine within respiratory medicine. So that's the sort of thing that we're starting to move towards now as we go forward as Proaxis, and I'm sure there's many other potential forms of collaboration in that sort of direction that we'd be interested in exploring. So thank you very much, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, David. It's exciting to see that these point of care testing developments, and as you say, currently it may be in the clinic, but ultimately nice to get that moved into the home. Our final presentation this afternoon, I have the pleasure of inviting Brendan McCann, who's the Chief Scientific Officer at Obscurus. Now, Obscurus is a healthcare technology company specializing in diagnostic test result reporting. And they're really at the forefront of patient empowerment, improving, allowing patients to improve their own health through providing those diagnostic results. Hopefully not stealing the essence of your presentation, Brendan, but I'm really delighted to pass it over to you and to hear some more about Obscurus.
Yeah, that's no problem. Thanks for having us here to present today. Hopefully my slides are visible now. So yes, we're a digital health tech company based in Belfast, and I guess it's fair to say that the pandemic has really accelerated the adoption of digital tools in healthcare, but in many ways this has been coming along the lines. You see a lot of the previous talks show things that have long been in development. But the expectation of patients as well has been growing as they seek the same advances in digital technologies as they've seen in other areas of their lives. And this extends to having access to their personal information. However, when it comes to health, access to the data is very limited and it's not really designed for patients as yet. Individuals want to take an informed and active role in their healthcare decision making, and this is something that many clinicians want and encourage and see as a way to patient engagement as a route to better health outcomes. And access to data that informs those decisions is fundamental to that happening. Healthcare and technology is a challenging area with multiple stakeholders, gatekeepers really, and legacy systems. And the common tech mantra of move fast and break things, it shouldn't be applied where patient lives are involved. In response to this, in this environment, there's many opportunities to improve efficiencies, enhance patient safety, and provide patients with a higher level of service. In response, we've developed a platform for handling clinical data, which allows apps for different services to be developed where a lot of the challenges, such as security, authentication, and infrastructure have already been addressed. Our initial apps have focused, supported by this platform, have focused on delivery of lab test results to patients, both patients and practitioners, but particularly focused on patients where you can provide a visual format that's engaging, accessible, and really is designed to reduce the workload for the patient to make sense of the information they're being presented. And with that, they can give them access to the history of their test results and support that with text, visual explanations, and videos. We're also involved in a number of projects looking to expand the capacity of our platform, addressing things such as monitoring of amber drug treatments for patients receiving drugs such as methotrexate. And we're also a partner in the Center for Personalized Medicine, which touches on a number of areas. But through that work, we've done quite a bit on questionnaire development, which is new for us, largely from shifting us from focusing on reporting out data to recording it. And that feeds into the last project and a bit more on topic for respiratory health. So it's something that our CEO, Alison Young, has taken the lead on, and she obtained funding from Innovate UK to address many of the issues arising from the COVID pandemic. To be honest, it's probably better if she had been given the all-male panel today. It's important that she wasn't here to present on this because she really drove this forward. So we recognize the gap around post-COVID syndrome or long COVID, where patients are experiencing symptoms related to COVID which last 12 weeks or more. And while COVID can be thought of as primarily a respiratory infection, long COVID is known to affect many different organ systems, with around 1 million sufferers in the UK and 21,000 here in Northern Ireland. And just this week, actually, the Health Minister, Robin Swan, announced a dedicated service to address long COVID. So over the past 6 months, really, we've engaged with GPs, researchers, and particularly patients to understand the gaps in this area. And I'm very grateful to Barry Henderson for his support in connecting us with various individuals who are active in Northern Ireland health and research. One of the particular activities we took was we surveyed patient groups, particularly through the likes of Facebook. From that, we learned that respondents expressed a dissatisfaction with the support they're getting for long COVID. 71% were describing their symptoms as moderate, and 87% saying they'd want an app to help monitor and track their long COVID symptoms. And interestingly, kind of reflecting the general direction, is that 73% of respondents said that they already use apps to track their health, such as MyFitnessPal. So from this, we've developed COVID Note, which is a tool for patients to be able to record their symptoms, allowing them to build a picture of how those symptoms progress over time. And it also facilitates the users recording COVID test results and vaccinations, as well as giving them access to updating guidance material. We've already signed up a cohort of patients who are keen to test out the app with us, which is currently in development. But we're very keen and sort of making a call out here to any clinicians or researchers who can see value in connecting with patients in this way, and would like to shape the way we design and increase the functionality of this platform as we go forward. So if there's any interest in that, please don't hesitate to get in contact. Thanks again to the speakers for the chance to speak.
Thank you very much, Brendan, and apologies if we were slightly rushing you at the end. I'm conscious everyone on the call. Yes, we're conscious everyone on the call that we're now at 2 o'clock, and that some people may have to drop off. If you have time, we're going to do sort of 5 minutes of questions here. Hope to answer some of the more burning questions you have, and then follow up, just close then. So if you can stay with us, we're only aiming for the next sort of five or so minutes. We'll get straight into the questions. Thank you all for the presentation. Question here, and I can't see who raised it, but a question around where can I find Northern Ireland publicly available and anonymised online respiratory research data to experiment on, or who could I contact to discuss this? This sounds like a question for Roger as to what the mechanisms are, or.
Well, you can certainly contact us and we can take a look at what we have. It is all open data apart from a subset, so the system allows for that secure kind of corralling of very sensitive information that was shared with us as part of the project, but the bulk of it is open data. And you can go directly to the sources, but we've done that consolidation for you. So if you did want to know what was available, I'm certainly happy to talk.
Thanks very much, Roger. Another question here. Now, this is something that we haven't talked on. We're not, and quite often comes in these is around governance and cybersecurity. So, and maybe raise the question sort of up a level. How big, not concern, but how big of an issue? How big of how much of your work is actually spent addressing cybersecurity and governance issues? Do you see it as being something that is still hampering development in this digital arena, or are we getting there? Any of our panel want to chip in on that?
So it's a pity that Martin's left. I know Morale probably has accessed health data, and there is a structure for doing that, usually going into the IRIS application form. Maybe Morale can maybe expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, so I don't have experience in accessing primary care data. So what I'll be talking about is tertiary care data, and it depends. So everything, if it is going to be just observational retrospective analysis and of use of anonymized data, you do need to put in as a research application through IRAS. But there is a good possibility that trust will give an ethical waiver, because these are already routinely collected data, which is anonymized and used, and you're not going to randomize the patient to groups, etc. But if you're going to go down the route of testing it out within the population itself, then it will become ethics. You will need ethical approval. So that is the way we access data for from our ICU, electronic health record.
And I think I'm correct in saying that if you're from industry, you will you'll be wanting to be collaborating with a clinician or an academic
I would
to access that data.
That would be correct. I don't think I've come across a case, at least within hospitals, where industry partner has access data, and I don't think that will be viewed that favorably. But it would be nice to have an academic partner in that, or a clinical partner.
Yeah, and we're happy to facilitate those discussions for industry coming in to work with health and academic partners.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Barry. If maybe I just a general question, and we'll go around and give your fortune-telling view of this, and it's really around what do you see for the future of the future impact of digital technologies in healthcare, particularly related to respiration, not exclusively. I've just lost my panel of who I'm going to ask. Oh, we can bring them back again. So in my order, or on my screen, if we just go around, Brendan, what's your view on, say, where you see the future of technology in the management of respiration?
I definitely think that, given that, one of the issues about sort of leading on from the last question about information governance and whatnot is that the patient is being cared for in that respect and doesn't really fully get their say in what's done there. And where we have more connections with patients, where we can ask them. I don't know, from your previous panel, Morris McElvenna talking about consent and how that can sort of be micromanaged and be given for small, or be granted and taken away for different aspects. I think that's going to play an increasingly important part in what we can do. And from an industry point of view, we're very keen to engage with patients and almost on their behalf get access to their data, not that we're getting on behalf of the company itself. So I think with that connection with patients will be very important.
And Morale, what's your view?
I suppose I'll probably go back to a bit of Brendan's point. The industry partners are generally seen a little bit as using patients' data for their own purpose. I think there is a bit of a confidence issue in patients seeing their personal record as being used by industry partners. So I think that needs to be broken down and shown that this is for improving patient care, and also to see how they will protect it from any negative effects of their data being taken out of, say, NHS kind of setup. I think that's very important. But my biggest issue is simple retrospective data analytics work, which will drive the development of the tools before testing, is severely impeded by the need for ethics applications, or even having to go through the process of it. By the time you get some sort of ethical waiver, you're talking 3 to 6 months time, and that's time wasted. So there should be some sort of blanket approach to use of routinely collected data for such purposes without needing to go through that pathway.
Thanks very much. David?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned in our presentation, we're definitely transitioning over to more and more involvement of digital health. So I don't think any more companies such as ourselves can just produce an assay to be used in a lab in isolation. So we're really looking at how we can link that up with the patient and with the healthcare professional, so that they get the data they need quickly in an effective manner, so that they can act on it. Rather than sending samples off to a lab and it disappearing there. And you see that in many ways with more and more use of multiplexing and different multiple parameters being measured on the same sample and linking those together, but also non-biomarker measures, FEV1, things like that, where people are starting to try and measure those at home or using portable devices. So I think we'll just go more and more in this direction as we go forward in the future.
Excellent, thank you. And Roger?
I would say I still think that the 2016 Bengoa report has relevance here. That idea of moving from acute care to the model of self-management of conditions of chronic care. We looked at applications of that and how you might reach out to people we've designed a phone app, for example, that could help people manage their own respiratory conditions. And it would tie back into one of the earlier speakers who has the, the device on the puffer that gives feedback and measurement of what people are really taking as opposed to, what they're reporting. So anything that goes down that route and supports people to support themselves.
Thank you very much. It just comes to me then to conclude our session today. Patrick, could you share this? Are you seeing a request to share a slide? I'll talk through it. Just to give you the brief pitch, as it were, in the final moments. CHIC, the Connected Health Innovation Centre, we run open project calls, and there's currently a call open closing on the 9th of July for funded projects for industry members. There's more details, just to say, on our website, www.ni-chic.org. I'd like to thank all our speakers today. I'd like to thank all our attendees, participants this morning, Barry, Pascal, and Jessica for pulling this together. Also Patrick, who's driving our production studio. We hope to be back for another event in September, October, and would hope to see you then. If you have any ideas for a particular area we should focus on, please let us know. Thanks for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hope to speak to you soon. Bye now.